I built this framework and I stand for it wholeheartedly. I believe in it. I move myself through it. And I know that it can really help people, and that whatever their objection is or like misunderstanding of quote unquote storytelling, like I have a way of allowing them to think differently about it.
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. Why is it important to have a unique framework as opposed to just being magic at what you do? And how do you find your framework? When I started coaching entrepreneurs, I was helping them one by one, using methods I'd learned from other people and co-creating the experience each time. There's nothing wrong with that. Then over time, I developed a framework that includes a lot of parts that are uniquely mine. To claim my framework, I had to first observe it and then get clear about the elements, write it all down, and then articulate it for the people I help. And I refine it over time. Having a framework has deepened my work and set me free. You'll hear more about how that happens for me in this conversation. But much more than that, you'll learn from my guest. Hillary Ray is the founder of Tell Me a Story. She trains entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers in how to use the art of storytelling as a powerful communication tool. In this episode, you'll hear what claiming her framework has made possible. Welcome, Hillary. I am so excited that you're here.
Yeah, thanks, Annie, for having me.
So I am really excited to dive in with you to this idea of finding your framework, finding your system, your method. And the reason why this is so important to me is that just like you, I was someone who used to just work with people one-on-one, help them through a process that it felt like we were co-creating and that was very particular to the individual I was working with. It didn't feel like it was a system as much as it just felt like it was a relationship and that we were just creating magic together. And then I've definitely come to appreciate having a method, having a system that I walk people through. And I would love to talk to you about that difference. For you, what is the difference between like, I just do what I do, I just help people, as opposed to I have a method, I have a framework?
Yeah, so my background is in music and theater and musical theater, and training in those things. There's a very specific method, a very specific process. You learn the language of reading music. There's acting techniques, like all of these things built in, like here's how you do this thing. And yes, there's fluidity in that, but there's definitely, it is structure. And I'm sure at one point, those people that put all of that together created frameworks for something that, you know, was in their hearts and minds and creative being. So that's part of my background. And then I have this improv comedy background where so much of it is putting something on its feet in the moment and seeing what happens. And so the way that I came to my approach to storytelling and personal narrative was through telling my own stories on stage. And that was always this marriage of I did some sort of preparation, and then I also just had to let it go in the moment and see what happens. And so it was kind of taking that theater structure and mixing it with that improv structure. And so as I was taking myself through this type of experience, and it was really just, I'm going to tell a story for entertainment. Like I was getting up multiple times a week, sharing stories from my life, sometimes the same story over and over again. And there wasn't really like an agenda or an end goal. I was just, this was my art. This is how I'm expressing myself. But when there started to be a need from people in my life, first casually and then more formally, to figure out what stories other people wanted to tell and how to tell them and where and why to tell them, I started to take them through this process that wasn't documented. It was just part of me. And I organically started, like, I would, if I needed to explain a brainstorming method, I just typed up a worksheet, and it didn't look like anything fancy. It was just like putting the exercise down on paper. Sometimes I wouldn't put it down on paper if it was a group going through it. I would just take them through it and they just had to experience it and feel it. And this was now a handful of years ago. And as I started to make more worksheets and started to repeat my own process and see that it did work with other people and that it was a adaptable process, I had an email from someone that had taken a workshop of mine many moons ago. And in the email, sort of as a joke, but a little uncertain at this point, was like, explained that she then went and taught some storytelling to another group of people. It was a group of yoga instructors, I believe. And I don't know what the purpose of the workshop was or what the intent of the storytelling was in yoga. It was probably different than what I was doing. But in this email and in a parentheses, she wrote, "Don't worry, I didn't steal your intellectual property." And in that moment, I was like, "Wait, would someone steal my intellectual property?" And then it kind of forced me to be like, is what I'm doing, like, there are other people teaching storytelling, there are other people telling stories on stage, but is this a process that is wholeheartedly mine? Is it one that, like, really is of value to people? Like, I knew it was, but I was still building my business. I wasn't full-time with my business, so everything was like, "Oh, let's just see what happens." But when that happened, I got a little nervous, and so I can't remember who I initially spoke to, but that led me actually to filing, my company name, Tell Me a Story, as a registered trademark, and specifically in the area of educational services, and the trademark outlines, like, what type of educational services I offer. And I had to help with a lawyer, and at the time, I was part of this program that I actually had a volunteer lawyer, and he was formerly David Letterman's lawyer, which was really cool. So I just felt very fancy and official, but I had to choose what I was trademarking because for every trademark you file, and I'm not an expert in this, but from what I understand, you pay a 325 or whatever it is fee. So, like, if I wanted to register my brand for merchandise, that's like a separate trademark filing from my, and it's different from intellectual property, but from my educational service offering. So this, what is now a framework. So I sort of preemptively got a trademark registration for my name, which I'm super grateful for. There's also now a television show called Tell Me a Story that I think is on its way to becoming defunct, but having the registered trademark kind of protected me there a little bit as well. But specifically for my work, it kind of, I think, subconsciously allowed me to, like, okay, like, I'm committing to this, and, like, what I offer and how I bring people through this storytelling experience is a value and is a framework. And then just over time, as more and more people I worked with, and, like, when I had a graphic designer to help me, like, visualize what I was doing, I, like, had a very specific process that I took people through, and it was working.
Yeah, what makes it like, why is it kind of better, or at least having particular advantages to have a framework as opposed to just being like, I'm Hillary, I make this magic? Like, what do you value about having a framework?
I think a couple things. It separates it from me, and not that I'm a liability in the work, but it feels bigger than me. So even if I'm the only, because I am the only person in my company, I don't think, like, I'm not in a place where I'm ready to have a team of 20, but I do see it as work that's bigger than me and a purpose bigger than me. And so if I have this framework, and it's funny because it's a framework and it's a system, but it's not a template. It's not like putting people through this mold and they all come out the same. Like, it is not that at all. But having the parameters and the process and, like, the official, quote unquote, registered trademarked exercises, it allows me to see a bigger vision for the work that I do. In addition to it just being easier to deliver, because I'm not, it's some things I tweak and adapt in the moment just as I get to know the person, but it's something that I can just show up and do, and I don't necessarily do it the same, but I just show up and do, and I know that it works.
I know, I totally feel that. I feel the same way. I know Tara McMullen has talked about, like, the difference between the believing that you're a special snowflake or believing that you have a secret sauce, and how if you've got a secret sauce, then that doesn't limit you to like what you can do in your own body with people who you're right in front of. Whereas if you're just a special snowflake, like there's only so much of you to go around. There's a really built in limit to what you can accomplish. I also feel like having a framework and having a system, I'm able to show up in my program and walk people through a process. And then I don't have to reinvent the process every time. So then it frees me up to go so much deeper with what the process brings up for people. Whereas in the beginning, I was using everything I had to just help people find the process. And now it's like, all right, we've got the process. We know this works. It's worked over and over again, but like, we don't have to worry about that. We can delve into what mindset blocks does this bring up in you? Or like, what does this make possible for you? We can just go a lot more expansive.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's what's been exciting lately for me is taking people through my process. And even though I have like a very specific type of person that I work with, or type of a few types of people that I work with, no one reacts to the going through the process in the same way. And so having that process, like you said, allows me then to be like, oh, okay, even if I think they're going to have a specific outcome, if they don't, I'm like, okay, well, all I need to do is focus my energy on like getting them to understand this in a way that makes sense for how they work, how they learn, how they communicate. And that's so exciting to me. And that's something that I've just like like in the last handful of months, I've been able to do because I know that what I built is good, is enough, is like fine and well, better than fine. Great.
Ooh, okay. That's really exciting. It's like because you know you've got a framework and it's worked for a lot of people, then and I'm really feeling like this is true for me as well. It's like you don't get knocked off your feet every time somebody has a hard time going through the process. You don't get knocked off your feet to like, oh, this process isn't right or I suck. It's like, no, you're able to delve right into where is this person struggling and let me focus on them and help them.
Yes, and I think very early on in my life as running my business full time, I was it was sort of before I had formalized my system, my framework, and I was doing a lot of corporate work because initially I didn't work with just individuals. My focus was doing these like big corporate trainings. I was like, oh, this sounds fun and fancy. But what I was doing was trying to figure out what they wanted and trying to adapt to a company culture that I was just assuming was there, and kind of being more bending to response or reaction to the work. And when I bent too much, like disaster ensued. Like there was one presentation I was giving where it's similar pieces of what I bring people through now, but it was a more generalized approach to storytelling. And I was giving this presentation and the woman in charge cut me off mid-presentation, which like I just was not expecting to happen, and disagreed with me and said, like, oh, I don't think that that's the case. And instead of me standing my ground and like saying like, no, actually, like without saying I'm the expert here, but like taking them through this thing that I know what I'm doing and that I believe in, I bent to her and I was like, oh yeah, I could see where you're coming from. And I kind of like backpedaled and like did a whole thing. And I like, not only was it the worst presentation I ever give, I left and had like nearly a year of being like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? Like, because I I didn't have the framework to back me up. And then I also didn't have myself to back me up.
Hmm. So, what would you say if you were back in that moment now?
I would be like, oh, actually, you're not right. And here are all of the reasons why. And I would have my 5 key elements of personal narrative, which is part of my framework, and have, I don't know, like it's funny. It's like I went from kind of building everything as I was doing it and kind of like quote unquote getting away with it and still doing good work. Like that presentation gone awry, like even though it was my worst, I know I still did good work, but it was that to like really like building out what this is and what I help people do, and then coming into a phase, which I feel like I only recently, like in like 2020, got to a point of like, I built this framework and I stand for it wholeheartedly. I believe in it. I move myself through it. And I know that it can really help people, and that whatever their objection is or like misunderstanding of quote unquote storytelling, like I have a way of allowing them to think differently about it. The other thing is after that presentation gone awry, I was like, I don't think I want to do corporate work anymore. So that was also like an awakening, and what actually helped me work. Like I still work with people that work in a corporate world, but they come to me and they can do it on their own terms, which I think is like so much more freeing anyway. So that was like a big shift in my business that I think was definitely like along that journey of like formalizing my framework.
Yeah. And so it helped you with so many things, including figuring out where is the very best place for you to do your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you just said you use your framework yourself. Can you give me an example of like a time when you've found yourself stepping into using your own framework for your own storytelling?
Yeah. So I actually just kind of updated my like what information lives on my website, and I guess what would be considered a sales page. But I wanted to mirror what I help people do in those sales pages by, instead of having a lot of, I tend to come across a lot of sale pages that are like, you are this, you feel this way, you have this problem. Here's how I help. Here's how we do things that help. And it helps. It's very effective. Clearly, it works. Everyone does it because it helps me see that you and be like, oh, that's me. But what I actually help people do in a number of different ways is use here's an experience I have gone through, I have felt, to teach people the you, if that makes sense. So it's kind of creating I statements versus you statements. And that I believe that it's actually more impactful and effective to do that because you're not pushing a narrative or a story onto someone if that isn't the exact thing that they feel or have experienced, but it's allowing them to translate your experience into the memory bank of their life to see if it resonates with them in some way. So I did that on my website. So I have these like mini stories on the different like offering pages. And then I also just recreated like a welcome series like for my newsletter where it was all first person storytelling. And so I had to and they were stories I've told in some capacity, but I really formally took myself through my process to do that. And then in little examples, like in the way that I explain my work, I try to use story as much as possible. And I know that it's not like story after story after story. But anytime I know that there's a story I want to tell, even if I've told it before, I can like quickly take myself through a process to get there. And it's never like I'm pulling a monologue out of a monologue book. That's not how I approach my work or how I help other people approach theirs.
So like you've kind of internalized, you've made a system and you've also internalized it so that you can kind of access it pretty quickly and walk through it.
Yeah, and I would say so I have three main, and without going to the nitty-gritty because it won't really make sense, but I sort of have three main parts to my framework for personal narrative storytelling. The first part is brainstorming. The second part is the crafting / prep and practice. And the third part is strategy and performance. So I don't go into that brainstorming part very often anymore because I know how to tap into the stories that I want to tell. And I know what stories are ready to be stories versus like a thing that happened to me in life. Because that's not necessarily like everything that happened to you. It doesn't necessarily turn into a story right away or at all. So that is kind of like, I don't need to go through the framework of that. So I basically, and my prep and practice, crafting / prep and practice is also like, I can do it really quick. Kind of, it's like a speed version that's like internalized. I do have like little worksheets I use. I have this storytelling cheat sheet and a public speaking checklist that I will use. And then strategy and performance is like really where I'll always continue to do the work.
Now let's hear from our sponsor real quick. And that's me. Create Your Program is my framework. Together with me and a small group of innovative entrepreneurs, you will turn your magic into your signature program. Having a signature program can help you step into the next phase of your business, a phase where you'll make a much bigger impact and step into bigger leadership. Does that sound scary and exciting? It totally is. I would love to have you join me. Head over to rebeltherapist.me/create to learn more. All right, let's get back to Hillary. Before we hit record, one thing that you mentioned that made me super curious was that you've seen this progression of going from kind of having a fluid process to being clear that you have a framework and then like naming that. And then you've moved into taking a stand. Can you talk about this new step or this new stage of taking a stand and what that means?
Yeah. One way I think about this, it's kind of a twofold thing. Like I'm taking a stand in that I wholeheartedly believe that my framework is a way that people can tell stories that isn't a formula, it isn't a template. It actually helps people tap in more deeply to who they truly are, and they can find alignment with things that have happened to them in life, with their current, like a story that serves them in the moment and that is in alignment with their mission, vision, and values, whether that's personally or professionally. And usually there's a crossover of that. So I've taken a stand in that I know that it can do that. And I believe that it's like a different way of communicating and like one that has like deep and meaningful change attached to it. But I don't think I was taking a stand in the stories I was telling. And I guess, and because part of how I help people is helping them find the stories that show them taking a stand, that show, and that like allows them to take up more space, not hiding behind a performative persona or a false identity. It's really like, here's who I am. Here's an example of it. I know how to deliver it in a way that makes me feel good. Thus, I'm showing up as myself. And to me, that's like the most powerful thing that you can do. So I help other people do that, and I've witnessed people doing it. But I think my storytelling, it wasn't lackluster in in like quality or like performance, or I guess like in performance based, but it was a little lackluster in that, like, I don't think I was really digging to find how to take a stand in my own storytelling / I like just wasn't communicating in the way that I teach people to communicate. And so I was doing a lot of like behind the scenes grumbling, like to myself, like, like, I don't really agree with that. Or it's sort of like when I didn't agree with that person in that presentation a couple years ago. And I didn't say I don't agree. I also didn't grumble. I assimilated and like bent to her theory. That kind of transitioned to like me grumbling, like, that's not the case. I am doing this like weird, like grumble character to you right now that no one can see. But it's like this, and that's kind of, it's not healthy for anything. Like I'm not explaining why I'm grumbling. I'm just like rolling my eyes at what I call like performative vulnerability, or this other type of what some people deem storytelling, which I call like vague booking, which is like when you don't give any details of, you give like a beginning, middle, and end, but there's no details. So we don't really understand that experience that you're going through. But then somehow people are like, oh, thank you for being so vulnerable. I don't know. There's just like things, especially in online spaces, like not so much. Well, actually, sometimes people like communicating out loud, but sometimes in like reading narrative, things like that. There were just a lot of little things I was grumbling about, or just something sounding very formulaic, very templated, like they watched a webinar and made a story to fit it kind of thing. So now I'm in this stage of business where I'm trying to link the stories that I know I want to share with people with the stand that I'm taking, either the stand with what I believe personal narrative storytelling can do, or just my own, like beyond my work, like my personal values, my vision for the world, like finding the stories that take a stand.
Wow. This is making me think too that like if we're in, because I totally have this, Hillary, like if we're finding ourselves grumbling behind the scenes, Like we really need to make note of that and like find what stand are we trying to take in those grumbles? Like that feels huge. That feels really important.
It's finding the stand and then it's verbalizing it and sharing it, and I think that's the part that feels very scary because and it's a thing I've talked about a lot too, is that you can't like, you're taking up space with your story, your voice, your words, and you don't even if it's something you wholeheartedly believe in and it feels like I always imagine it as, like, spinal, like, alignment from my feet through to my heart to my head, like, I feel it in me and I put that out in the world, that's that sort of improv, letting it go in the moment. I have no control over how that's going to be heard, received, felt, viewed, perceived, all of those things. And I think for a lot of people, that could feel horrifying. Well, if I can't control like the response that I'm going to receive, well, then I'm not going to say anything at all. But I think trusting, like when you do feel that alignment of everything coming together and having the like a well-crafted narrative to deliver that like is true to who you are and like feels good in your voice and makes you feel powerful and all the things you want to feel and express to people. It doesn't matter what happens on the other end, and kind of trusting that is the scary part. And I think that's like the choice of like, am I taking a stand out loud or am I going to grumble and hide? And so I think like I'm pushing myself more towards the taking a stand out loud. And that's always what I want to encourage people I work with to do. And I don't have control over that. Once they're done working with me, that's up to them. But I would hope that they've done all this work. So why not put it out into the world? Why not show up as the best version of that or the truest version of who they are and share who they are in like a really unique, interesting way?
Yeah. And I guess the why not, I mean, I know that wasn't really a why not, but like, I guess the why not that comes up, I think for me, and I see definitely coming up for a lot of people I work with in moments is like, because people won't like me. Like somebody's not going to like me. I'm going to be banished. I'm going to be like rejected. And either I will not make enough money because there are too many people who don't like me, or I just won't be safe emotionally because too many people won't like me. And like, my answer to that is, of course, some people don't like you. There are a lot of billions of people. And so it's not going to work for everybody to like you. And the people who love you can't find you.
There's that. And it's like not everyone will like you. And that's actually better, I guess. For sometimes it's better. The other thing is, and there's science behind it that I'm not going to repeat fully because I'm not a scientist, but with what's so cool about storytelling is that the way your brainwave patterns work in relationship to the people or person that you're telling your story with, they sync up. And there's all the science behind like when you tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and it's fully engaged and there's like an emotional through line and all of that, the listening audience brainwave patterns match the brainwave patterns of the storyteller. And I think when I started performing stories on stage, you could feel that connectedness. And that's all that really mattered. I was doing competitive storytelling shows where there were winners and points and all of that stuff. And like, yeah, it was hard not to get wrapped up in that winning. Like it took me a really long time to ever win a storytelling competition, but I did finally. But I didn't focus on that. To me, it was like, I feel like this is what I want to say to these people. And I feel like energetically feel that connection and that deep listening. And it doesn't matter if someone comes up to me after and says, I love your story. And I also think back to I think now like thousands of stories I've experienced, whether at a live storytelling event or with people I work with. And in all of that, in the last like 10 years of this being my life and being a storytelling nerd, there has been literally only one person who told a story at a storytelling open mic in New York many moons ago, where I and the people I was with were like, I think that person is dangerous and I think they need help. And the story is disgusting. One person. And I think that was like a very extreme thing. They didn't realize that the thing that they were saying was horrifying, and that like, and it's hard not to make a joke, but I think they were a sociopath, but it's like, just trusting the power of story and of sharing who you are. It's not that people aren't gonna not like you. I just don't think it's not that you want everyone to like you, but I don't think that if it's so hard to let go of like that, especially when we're used to external validation and all of that.
Yeah, I guess liking isn't even the right idea. It's not about liking, it's about like resonance and like you said, this connection that is deeper than like. It's just way deeper. Which makes me want to ask you one more thing before I have to lose you is you just said that you're not using social media anymore. Speaking of likes. What's that been like and why'd you do it?
Well, as of recording this podcast, I'm only on day 6 of not using social media, and specifically, it was Facebook and Instagram, and I'm doing it for, like, political, ethical reasons, but also because and I've eliminated both like, my profiles are up, they're dormant, and everything's gonna get deleted at the end of 2020, but I don't find it an effective way of storytelling, and I know there's a lot of people that would argue with me against that. I feel it's very performative. It's very limiting. I think the talking and we're in this virtual world so much now, but the parasocial connection that happens when you're just talking to a camera, even if you're envisioning your audience and know that people are gonna be there, that's different than you being with your audience and having that feedback, whether virtually or in person. It's kind of that. It's a lot of, yeah, mostly like this idea of performative vulnerability and the shoulds of what people should be doing, how they should. And that's not everybody. I've seen people use social media in really brilliant, effective ways, but I couldn't find a way to put my framework into the template, for lack of a better description, an algorithm of social media. And then from like a business standpoint, I wasn't getting any business from it. So energetically, I didn't want to put time into something that I didn't like doing, that I didn't feel was like an extension of who I am and the work I take people through. If there's no personal return on investment or literal return on investment, and it's only been 6 days, but I'm like, wow, I don't even feel like checking the, like, silly celebrity accounts I followed. Like, I'm just doing other things with my time, and I have plans to experiment a little with Twitter, like, return to Twitter after a long time, and LinkedIn interests me. Like, I'm trying to find a way to make it, quote, unquote, "cool." I don't know if I can do that single-handedly. I don't find it a cool platform as how I define cool. I guess, like, unique, genuine, not
Like
it feels
innovative
yeah.
or
But I'm willing to dabble in those things because they're not so far in misalignment with me, like, ethically and politically. But I'm excited to figure out other ways to tell stories and to showcase stories and help the people I work with figure out other ways to tell stories and showcase stories as well.
and you're not getting folks through social media anyway. Where are folks usually finding you?
It's still this, like, weird hodgepodge of word of mouth. A lot used to be Google searching. That was before the television show Tell Me a Story, which sort of put a little glitch in the plan. But a lot of, like, yeah, word of mouth, Googling, and then also now and how I'm best able to show up as a storyteller and as the founder of my company is doing interactive presentations that are live. So help taking people through a very specific exercise of mine called the 5-word life story and doing that virtually. And then also speaking where I can't see the audience, but still live. So knowing that they're in the chat and that there is a dialogue there and podcasts and which is something that I just love anyway. Like I have a podcast that I make for fun. So just being able to communicate via audio is something that's always been exciting for me.
Can I ask you one more
Of
question?
course.
This is just something I really enjoy hearing about, and I always hear it that my listeners love hearing about. Do you have any like rituals or like some people call them productivity hacks that help you get into the zone of getting the things done that you want to get done?
Yeah. I think I try to every day find a balance between work tasks, even if it's like a work task I'm really excited about, but even one like I have every week, I have a thing that says digital filing so that I like put all the things on my desktop into the folders like where they need to go. But it just reminds me of being an intern and having to like physically file things at places I was an intern or my work study job at college. So it's like sounds terrible to me. But anyway, whether it's something like that or like something fun and exciting, like writing my newsletter or something, I try to balance that with personal rituals, I guess, which for me is meditation. I use a streaming service offered by this wonderful woman named Jessica Snow, who does these beautiful visualization meditations. I exercise every single day. I am on a break now, but I was taking Japanese twice a week, and I'll resume that in a couple of months. So just like breaking up like from 12 to 2, Monday and Wednesdays, Japanese, and then like doing the studying. So I think for me, like I can't do like work, then non-work. I kind of have to mix it up the whole day. But then also when I'm done my work, I'm done my work. And it's not like, oh, I didn't do enough or I need to do more. So yeah, that's been to me like the most important thing that I do as far as ritual.
Thank you so much, Hillary. It's been such a pleasure.
Of course. Yes.
You can find out more about Hillary at tellmeastory.info. Now, I'll give you an update on Hillary. We recorded this 3 months ago, and I recently asked how it's going with her departure from social media. And here's what she says. I'm off Facebook and Instagram, and I spend minimal time on LinkedIn. As far as results, it's given me the time and energy to focus on my newsletter, the Speak Up, and connecting with folks in virtual gatherings on Zoom, whether hosted by a partnering organization or hosting it myself. I just hosted my first one today, the Speak Up session. It's helped me to trust myself, my work, what I stand for, and not get distracted or carried away with what's being presented on social media. Thank you so much, Hillary. We love hearing your update. And it's actually making me think, I need to go back and get updates from people from former episodes. And I think you would probably really enjoy listening to that. I want to thank Cosmo Palms for editing this podcast and every episode I've ever created. If you found this episode supportive, please share it with your favorite entrepreneurs. That's how we reach more people. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Oh, and I really, really hope that we have decent news coming in throughout the next several days. Just had to say that as I know that this is dropping on November 3rd. All right, I'm thinking of you and sending you so much love.
Maybe it's recording on your end, but no.
No, because I'm still getting familiar with Squadcast. So I thought when it said record, it meant it was recording, but it was telling me hit record.
Now it says recording on my end, so we're good, but you'll have to start over. And what you said was so beautiful.
I will. All right, here we go.